Mazda's been slowly making a move up market, and while it doesn't have what it takes to go toe-to-toe with a brand like BMW, it isn't totally unreasonable to say that at least some of its vehicles slot in somewhere above the mainstream models they usually compete with. And that's essentially the whole purpose of this all-new CX-90. Not that there aren't some more affordable trims to choose from, but its very drivetrain represents a reach into the premium space.
But whether or not it actually has the goods to compete with a premium vehicle is what we're going to find out today. And we wanted to give it a fighting chance, so we put it up against this Acura MDX. Not that the MDX isn't luxurious, but it's definitely not at the same level as something like a Mercedes-Benz GLE class. Plus, the MDX is a little bit more expensive, which makes this comparison even more compelling. But there's just something to be said about the essence of luxury that can be really hard to match.
For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Okay, so not every trim fits into this sort of semi-luxury vibe that Mazda was going for, but the drivetrain and the platform definitely do fit that because it's a lot like something like the BMW X5. This is a rear-biased platform, so it's all-wheel drive, but the rear wheels are prioritized, whereas most Mazda all-wheel drive vehicles, they're front-wheel biased.
Yeah, and what that does is it's supposed to make it feel a little bit sportier. So you can definitely see where they got the inspiration for this setup, but does it work?
I mean, a little bit. It's also got that inversely mounted straight six, which is super cool. That's also something that BMW, Audi, Mercedes do. So basically, the way to think about it is if you pop the hood, most inline engines, you're going to see them across the engine bay. This one is mounted tip to tail, and that's not just the case with this 6-cylinder. The plug-in hybrid that uses a 4-cylinder is also inversely mounted, which is kind of cool. Now, speaking of this 6-cylinder in particular, it does have all the guts I think you could ever ask for in a vehicle like this. It makes 319 horsepower, but then if you put premium grade gas in the tank, that jumps to 340 horsepower, and then it makes 369 pound-feet of torque, whether you're on 87 octane or 93. I know you said you weren't in love with the way it sounds, but it actually doesn't bother me too much, kind of knowing what this thing is and what it's all about. And really what impresses me the most is just how eager it is to get all that output to the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why a lot of those other luxury automakers use that engine setup is for smoothness. That layout is just inherently smoother, so I totally get it. The power delivery here is very smooth, but I feel like the clunky transmission kind of like takes that away.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So we've had problems with this thing pretty much since we picked it up on downshifts. For whatever reason, just casual cruising, it wants to drop gears and they're really noticeable. It's almost like in the Jeep Wrangler 4xe, the plug-in hybrid, when it shifts from gas to electric and you really feel it.
It's really noticeable.
And at first I thought that's what was going on here because this is the mild hybrid. So I was like, oh, is it trying to coast? But I looked and it's not engine speed dropping, it's actually spiking because it's dropping gears. So I don't know what the heck's going on, but it's really taking away from the experience here.
And that kind of sucks because smoothness is one of the defining attributes of a really great luxury vehicle, and I just don't feel like this meets that standard.
I'd agree, but then on the flip side, now this is a mild hybrid. This is something that we always go over. Don't be confused. This doesn't mean it's super efficient. It's not like a proper conventional hybrid or the plug-in hybrid version that you can get, but even taking that into account, I am blown away at the efficiency of this thing. All-wheel drive, pretty big, 6-cylinder engine. It's officially rated for 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers combined, which is better than most SUVs this size. And we've been doing better than that all week long.
That's pretty impressive.
Right down into the high 8s when we were cruising around the other day doing our back-to-back drives together. I was blown away by that number. And the other cool thing, again, yes, premium is recommended in this top trim in order to kind of maximize the output, but it is not required. This thing can run on regular grade gas, and considering gas prices these days, that is amazing.
Absolutely. The other thing that I didn't want to forget about is that I think the ride here is a little bit choppy as well. And again, it takes away from that smoothness we expect. And usually for a sportier car, if the ride's a bit choppier, I'm okay with that because it's a good trade-off. But this doesn't feel that sporty to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm fine with that because I personally don't care in an SUV like this about sportiness. I would agree though that in a lot of instances you can really feel pressure cracks, you know, curb cuts. The other thing I noticed in this thing that really shocked me is bump steer. You hit a pothole at speed on the highway and the steering wheel wants to tug in one direction or the other. That's kind of like an old, you know, hydraulic steering. You expect something like that, not in something this modern. That really shocked me.
So that ride quality is actually a great jumping off point to introduce ourselves into the MDX, because when I first got in it, the smoothness is the first thing that stuck out to me. Everything about it is smooth. The powertrain, the transmission, the ride, it's fantastic.
Yeah, so this thing does have adaptive dampers, which the CX-90 does not, but I don't really look at that as something that you could say, oh, well, it's not fair, because, hey, if you're trying to be a premium product, then you should have premium features. And
Exactly.
that includes stuff like adaptive dampers.
Yeah, and so this engine is a V6, so a little bit different layout from the CX-90.
Yep.
It's a 3.5 liter. It has 290 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque.
Oh my God,
So
you
that's-
never remember the numbers.
I know,
I'm
but
blown away.
that is a lot less than what the Mazda puts out.
Yes.
And when you really put your foot into it, it's definitely not as fast. But I think it all comes together in a way that is like much more conducive to that whole luxury experience we keep talking about.
And if you really want performance, there is 2 versions of the Type S that have a turbocharged V6 that make just as much output as the CX-90, so who cares?
Exactly. And plus, when it comes to a SUV like this, I really don't care about performance that much.
Neither do I. The thing I care about more is fuel economy. And this thing, sure, I mean, I don't think a lot of people seem to care too much, but this thing is worse on gas, both on paper and in practice.
Yeah, so my as tested average right now is sitting at 12 liters per 100 kilometers, which is terrible.
We did the same drive loop and it was up in the high 11s for no reason.
It doesn't make sense because it wasn't like I was driving like a maniac, and it's pretty embarrassing because I was driving the Toyota Sequoia last week, okay? And that is a truck. And that was getting slightly worse than this, but only slightly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just kind of one of those things. Now, the Sequoia is newer and it uses that twin turbo V6. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going on that we could talk about. I think people will be fine with something in the 11s or 12s. My buddy has an older MDX and all they do is shuttle the kids to school and stuff with it. And he'll be like, oh, we're averaging something in like the 15 liter per 100 kilometer mark. And I'm like, that is atrocious.
Terrible. Something else I really don't like about the MDX is a lot of the switchgear. So it uses this push button gear selector system, which I don't find it to be very intuitive because you can't do it without looking, right?
Yeah. And then the drive mode selector is this dial that looks like it could be a volume knob or maybe one of those dial gear selectors. It's all very confusing and convoluted. And then on top of that, all of this glossy plastic in here. I don't know why this is a thing.
This plastic to me does not say luxury at all.
People, oh, it's piano black. A, it's not. B, pianos are wood and lacquer. This is plastic. Like, this is cheap and awful.
Yeah, we hate it. Also,
It's so gross. Look at this.
I know, it's just disgusting.
Horrible.
I also hate this trackpad. This is a hill I will die on, and I know a lot of people are going to come at me in the comments and say like, oh, you'll get used to it. But the point is, you should not have to get used to this. I find this borderline distracting and dangerous to use.
Yes, agreed.
I can't even change the radio station when I'm driving because it is too distracting, and that's a failed system to me.
Now, forget all that stuff for a second. We should talk about pricing. And something that's interesting is the 2023 MDX in Canada starts at $63,300, which is the exact same sticker price as that CX-90 Signature.
That's the top trim.
Now that is the top trim. The other thing is, of course, you have to add freight to both of them. It's a little less with the Mazda, a little more here, but either way, pricing wise, it is identical for the starting price. But when you take a look at this trim we're driving, which is the Platinum Elite, it's $70,300 before freight and tax. That is a lot of money, but it definitely kind of has that vibe that makes it feel like that price premium is justified.
I think so too, and we never even talked about the style. Like, I think outward style, this says to me luxury vehicle.
Yes.
The CX-90 looks kind of awkward to me.
It's frumpy. Like I said to you the other day, like when you look at the greenhouse, so like the glass, it's awkward. It's disproportionate to how much door there is.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of sheet metal. It's got that big old bubble butt. I just don't like it very much from a styling perspective. And I remember going to Europe last year, driving the CX-90 as a sort of preview. And I remember feeling the same way about that thing. It's a little bit smaller. And I remember looking at the styling and being like, this is a weird take on Mazda's design language. And now here we are with this version. I've seen them out on the streets. Every time I walk up to that thing, I'm like, it's kind of awkward. Whereas I don't hate the style of this.
I kind of like it, actually. It says luxury to me. The proportions are right. The lines are good. I even like that big grille.
Yeah.
So another thing I like about the MDX is the third row. So I think it's actually pretty roomy, and I think it's a little roomier than what the CX-90 is offering.
I would say they're almost identical. And the funny thing is, the CX-90's wheelbase is actually quite a bit longer, and that usually leads to more passenger space, right? Because it's not about the cargo area, it's about how much room is between the wheels, and more space means you can add legroom. They're almost identical on paper, and again, in practice. Like, they are very similar when you actually climb in there. And yeah, I know I'm bigger than the average person that's going to get stuffed in any third row.
Right.
But in both of them, I feel like there are better options out there.
Oh yeah.
I really feel like if you need maximum space in an SUV this size, the Buick Enclave is still about as good as it gets. It's spacious, and it kind of occupies that same, not quite luxury, but almost.
Yeah.
Like, it's that weird in-betweener that Mazda is going for. But the thing I will say, this one feels luxurious. The MDX, you can tell, no, it's not a BMW or an Audi, but that's fine. It definitely feels premium. It feels upscale. The Mazda just feels poorly executed.
Yeah, I agree
Like,
with that.
it's trying so hard to be luxurious, and then on top of that, all the trouble we've had with the drivetrain. I just don't think Mazda executed as well as it probably could have.
Yeah, the devil is really in the details, and I think Mazda got a lot of those details, unfortunately, quite wrong.
And this thing, on the other hand, no, it's not exciting, but it nails the basics. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's comfortable.
Yep.
It does everything you need it to do, and it can probably do it with your family in here too. And that, to me, is what it's all about.
Exactly.
Okay, so the CX-90 Signature, the trim that we are testing, it does have a lot of the same stuff, at least on paper. Now, you do get real wood trim, you get upgraded leather, although I will say, I don't think it feels as nice as the stuff in the MDX.
I think you're right. Also, the seats themselves are not as comfortable or soft as what's in the MDX.
Yeah, I don't hate them, but I don't disagree with you. I mean, unlike the Kia Telluride with those awful seats, this is a big step up. But yeah, maybe they're not quite as nice, but they're not a big detractor for me.
Yeah, and this trim is interesting. I can see what they're trying to do with this kind of like fake suede look. But again, it's just executed in a way that makes it look kind of cheap.
It looks like a wet teddy bear.
Yeah,
It's really weird.
It's kind of accurate.
It's like there's too much pile to it.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre. Anyways, that doesn't really jump out at me as luxurious. Also, the switchgear. I complain about this a lot in vehicles that are supposed to be luxurious. This plastic, it's kind of cheap. Now, the good thing is it doesn't have the glossy plastic trim that you get in that MDX.
That stuff is impossible to keep clean. The day I picked it up, it was already smudged with fingerprints and a whole bunch of dust. Automakers just gotta stop using it.
Yeah, but I do like the layout in here. The second row, it's not so bad with these captain's chairs. I also like the realistic approach to the third row in this one. It's only got 2 seat belts because that thing, it's kind of cramped. Now, the CX-9, so the kind of predecessor to this thing, was really tight. That was always the big beef with it. This one has a little bit more space, but it's not all that roomy, and that's why I like that this only has 2 spots. But some of the lower trims, 3 seats across the back. I don't even think you could fit 3 kids across the back.
No way, that would be way too uncomfortable.
Anyways, the other thing we do need to talk about here is infotainment.
I hate it.
And I don't hate it as much as you, but I haven't had the problems that you've had.
Yeah, so earlier this week when Dan and I went on our long evaluation drive, he was interacting with the system and it was just fine. But as soon as I tried to connect with my Android phone, the whole thing went haywire. The screen would freeze and then it would just keep cycling, restart, freeze again, and it was happening for like the whole 2 hours we were driving. And it was so frustrating. I've not experienced that in any other vehicle, and I think for something this new, that's pretty unacceptable.
Yeah, and we had a colleague who experienced the same thing with an Android phone with a different unit, so something is not right here. The other thing, though, I do want to say, aside from the fact that I haven't had any problems with it, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, they are both wireless. The other cool thing is, now Mazda is stuck with this stupid dial on the console that I absolutely hate. It's supposed to minimize distraction, and it works in some ways, but really tapping a touchscreen is just better. But the cool thing is, at least Mazda has given in a little bit to that pressure from the public and people like us. The touchscreen works only with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which, okay, I can deal with.
Fine, I guess so. I just think they could have done a lot better.
But then you look at it in the MDX, it's no touch at all, and that is just terrible. That stupid touchpad.
It's even worse.
Oh my God.
It makes me so angry.
I guess you gotta take the good with the bad. To recap, we like the range of trims the CX-90 is offered in, as well as its rear-biased architecture and the efficiency of the mild hybrid version. We don't like the way the transmission behaves, that it feels like this top trim is trying a bit too hard to be luxurious, and that the third row is still a little small compared to some other entries out there.
When it comes to the Acura MDX, we like how it has a sort of underlying sense of luxury, its great ride quality, and how unobtrusive its powertrain is. We don't like the touchpad for the infotainment system, how inefficient it is, and the glossy plastic trim inside that's impossible to keep clean. In the end, this comparison wasn't as close as we thought it was going to be. You know, the MDX definitely has an air of luxury that the CX-90 just can't match. Plus, its plush ride is pure premium.
Try saying that 10 times fast. Seriously though, I definitely describe the CX-90 as at least a little underwhelming. Between the clunky transmission and the try-hard atmosphere of this trim's interior, it's definitely not the vehicle I was hoping it would be, and I don't think the execution is exactly what Mazda had envisioned when it set out to build this thing either. And that's not to say it's a bad vehicle, but it's definitely not up to the same standards as a true luxury SUV like the Acura MDX.